Well, guys, I want to thank you for tuning in. I couldn't be more happy to have on the line somebody whose work has meant a heck of a lot to me. And for those of you who know him, I'm sure his work has meant a heck of a lot to you, too. He's a forensic historian and a whistleblower. It's Richard Grove from TragedyAndHope.com. Richard, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me, Sean.
I should tell you, I listened to a interview you did. I believe it was on Red Ice Radio with Heinrich. And I listened to your testimony about your 9/11 experience several times. I think I listened to that particular podcast twice because it was so incredibly gripping. Do I have that right? Were you on Red Ice Radio as a guest?
Oh, definitely. I know Henrik and Lana, and it's a wonderful show. I had listened to it while I was developing my first podcast, going through the first 20 episodes. Was 9/11 Synchronicity back in 2006. So I've listened to Henrik's podcasts for a long time, and every now and then I find something so interesting that I got to share an hour or two with my friends.
Yeah, I mean, it really is exceptional. If folks haven't heard that, I'd encourage you all to go to Red Ice Radio and check out the interview that Richard did. I'm sure you can search for it there, or if I can find the link, I'll embed it in the more information section here below.
Yeah, if memory serves, I think I did 2 interviews with him maybe last year, and the one in October is the one folks are looking for. If you're looking through his playlist, the October one was on 9/11, I think.
Well, I've listened to just about everybody who's ever had a story to tell about 9/11, and I mean everybody, from William Rodriguez, who was in the basement when the first plane hit the first building, and was the last man out, literally, of the buildings. I've listened to testimony from just about everybody, and I've never heard testimony as powerful as yours. It really moved me a lot because I'm well versed in the official story of 9/11, and I'm well versed in the alternative theories, and boy, I'll tell you, that is just one powerful interview. We don't have to get into that now here because I think it would take our entire time with you, but you have such powerful testimony to share. Is that basically, do you think, the event that contributed to your wake-up? I think from that interview, that's pretty much the gist that I took from it.
Well, definitely. My personal experience played into me asking a lot of questions, because when you see buildings blowing up and you've never seen anything like that before, I mean, that's a real shock. And I always describe the footage that's shown on that day around the world over and over again as a snuff film. And so everyone's traumatized to some extent, depending on your proximity about that event. But yeah, it was definitely, it wasn't the first thing that made me ask a question, but it was the first thing that made me say, hey, I really am not familiar with my surroundings, and that's dangerous. And I knew enough to at least start following those questions, finding substantial answers, and building upon that. And I'd say that plays into the research a huge part as far as why I did it. My personal experience as far as the research, that I don't think it plays a big role, other than because of where I was working, I was able to recognize certain facts. And then once I started following those facts, I think that's where it builds out to something that's relevant to everybody.
Well, the other thing I want people to realize, too, is that I think you're one of the best-spoken intellectual folks in the alternative media that I've discovered. You're just really, really such an intelligent, bright guy that I've learned a lot from you. I know that your core focuses really these days are on intellectual self-defense and self-reliance in all areas. And you actually have a program over at Tragedy and Hope called History So It Doesn't Repeat. And your most recent interview is with Charlotte Iserbyt, the author of The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. And the interview runs 1 hour and 14 minutes. And I would encourage everyone to head over to TragedyAndHope.com and listen and watch that interview now, because it's just so powerful, and it speaks specifically to this idea that we all need the wake-up call, and then part of the wake-up call is learning how to think for ourselves. And I think you really stress the trivium. Is that right, Richard? Grammar, logic, and rhetoric?
Well, what we teach is the integrated trivium method, which is a little bit different than the classical trivium. The classical trivium, classically, was something that was prescribed by authorities, whether it be a religious institution or a government institution, to train their population kind of in an enclosed circle, which was called the encyclios paideia, which means a circular education. It's also the same root word where we get encyclopedia. It's a limited, finite set of knowledge, and basically you're presented with that, and that there's nothing outside of that. The integrated trivium method that we teach is a process of observation, identification, organization, and communication, which allows each individual to act autonomously, learning for yourself, not having to wait for an authority to prompt you or, lead you in a false direction. You'll be able to recognize fact from fiction and be able to learn the new tasks and develop new habits that lead to a more self-reliant and less dependent lifestyle in the state.
Well, when I watched your recent documentary, State of Mind, The Psychology of Control, which was released in July of 2013, it really helped uncover a lot of the mysticism and the secret societies. It helped me understand better how the powers that be help lock down a society as effectively as the powers that be have locked down this society. And can you just talk a little bit about that film, about State of Mind, and help us understand how the individual can take back their own power and become autonomous again, and why it's so important for people to take those steps?
Well, that's kind of funny. I can tie it back to the question you asked before, and I was also interviewed for a movie called Take Back Your Power, which has to do with smart meters, but it's about looking at your environment and questioning the use of technology in its various forms and how it's being used to enslave you. When you brought up Shoah Iserby, it made me think of, the reason I interviewed her for my series, History So It Doesn't Repeat, was because she had been interviewed for State of Mind. And I had already read her books, but, just getting a taste of what she had to say on some of these subjects, I wanted to have her for an extended interview. And the way that interview kicked off was I asked her why she does what she does. And she spoke uninterrupted for about an hour. And I think that most people have never heard her just freely sharing what she's about and why she's doing it and what's going on. But what you find through and through the interview, through State of Mind, through my interview with John Taylor Gatto called The Ultimate History Lesson, these are all reflections they're facets on the same gemstone that we find ourselves here pondering. We had this thing called America. We were all brought up through public school and a lot of mythology. And then you get out into the real world and you find out, hey, wait, that's not really the way the world works. We don't have these checks and balances. And the fact that people think we have checks and balances in the first place means that government must have some power that can get out of control and has to be kept in check. And I think that the public has been anesthetized to kind of be numb to that aspect. And we kind of grow up in this terrarium lifestyle these days where we're artificially supported in almost every way and disconnected from nature. So what Iserby, what Gatto, what many others were pointing to was the way that they've been changing our culture is slowly and methodically and incrementally such that you don't notice it at any given time, but you can only notice it if you take like a core sample back into the past and look at these different striations, and you can watch the tyranny, you can watch the collectivism, all these things creep into our education system. So the reason after something like 9/11 that the public doesn't know what's going on and can't, they have to look to the president and look to the corrupt media for their answers. That's just a function of people having the liberty and freedom and self-reliance bred out of them systematically through the education system, as Gatto and Charlotte Iserby, their whole life's work is telling people about this and these details. So most of what I've done over the past 10 years, after becoming a whistleblower and retiring from the corporate world, is to first observe and identify what is the factual and actual nature of the world that I'm occupying and that I see all these things going on in. And then what are the contradictions? Oh, well, we're told that, we're being spied on to protect us from terrorists, when really, provably, the audit trails lead back to terrorists that are funding both sides and considering themselves the investigators of crimes that they've committed.
Well, that's absolutely right. And as has been noted before by George Carlin, the system doesn't want independent thinkers and critical thinkers. The system wants obedient workers. When we talk about the dumbing down of the education system, when we talk about the powers that be manipulating society for their own benefit, do you come back to the same cartel that so many of us do in our camp, Rockefeller, Rothschild, and the active destruction of the education system being really, I think, funded by the Rockefellers specifically? When I take a look at reality through the lens of critical thinking, and I look at vaccines, I see in many ways population control. And when I look at paper money and paper precious metals, I see the opposite of real wealth. And, whereas these powers would argue that increased security equals increased freedom, you and I both know that the opposite is true. Common Core in the education system, 2 + 2 = 5. I mean, everything that we're talking about is self-evident and obvious to us because of our ability to, I guess, use the trivium and use critical thinking. Whereas for the quote-unquote sheeple, they're still blind to it. So, two-part question, really. Are you surprised that people are still as blind as they are in this nation, despite all of our recent tumultuous history, which has woken so many of us up? And do you track many of these issues back to the Rockefeller Rothschild cartel?
I got a two-part answer. The first part is no. Learned helplessness is what's going on there. The second part is yes. I can trace it back to that same international globalist cartel of people with no ethics and morals, and they act in an evil way by taking away and plundering and doing worse things than we can even imagine, because they're not reported through the Rockefeller and Morgan news agencies. So I would take your two-part question with my two-part answer and add on these next three layers to that second part. What you're talking about as far as the international bankers, the globalists, they don't believe in individual sovereignty. They don't believe in nations. They believe in collectivism, and they believe that individuals should be used to serve an elite population who think that they are God here on earth, to be an authority and tell you what to do with your life. So if you happen to use your mind and think about this, you could you could have a term for these people, which would be intra-specific kleptoparasites, people of the same species who are plundering from us. Intraspecific kleptoparasites would be that layer that you referred to. I could take it to a philosophic layer and say it's not any one group of people. Now, all of these people subscribe to a philosophic corruption of reality. They argue that there is no objective reality, and therefore it's a philosophy of solipsism, or really the absence of any reasonable or philosophic thinking, because philosophy is about finding truth. I could take it one more level and say that the evil really is not the king. It's all the people who let that go on and treat him like a king and give him respect like a king. So you have this whole ruling class that develops. So the people who don't think for themselves, i.e. the order followers out there, the people who assume, the people who know better and let bad things happen out there and don't defend individual rights, that is how evil is precipitated by that ruling class. So you can really study it you need to study it on all three levels to have a holistic perspective of it, because it's not just any one group, because this type of mentality has existed through time, since the creation of money. So what you're getting into by looking into 9/11 is really the history of the world, the history of currency, the history of governments, the history of all these institutions around us. So I think it's a fascinating journey. I just wish we could have gotten this education in school and they didn't have to blow up people in New York City and around the world to do this.
Are you surprised by the lengths to which these people are willing to go to protect their system and to keep the people enslaved? Do you ever find yourself shocked by the fact that they continue to roll out 9/11 time and time again, even though so many have poked holes through the story and so many realize that the official story is a sham? I guess, do you find yourself shocked that these people are so willing to take us to continuous war after war after war? It seems they will stop at nothing. Are they ultimately just social Darwinists?
Yeah, they're eugenicists, they're social Darwinists, they're collectivists. They're just people that don't respect the rights of others, and they selectively believe in truth. I mean, they would argue if you said something out of scene to them, they would demand a reason. Why weren't you here on time, or whatever, They demand reason for part of their lives, but the other part of their lives, they acquiesce. And so I'm shocked every day. I'm shocked and horrified every day by the news that comes out, and it's not even a slippery slope and a tyranny. It's like a free fall into the black hole. It's like everything that this country fought against in 1776 in the revolution, we have completely been colonialized. And the fact that, we consider, having firearms something to do with sporting, well, that's the elite British ruling class that didn't allow other people to have firearms or hunt or sustain themselves, because it's the king's land and you got to pay tax. That's everything we try to get away from, right? And so now we have this whole mentality in America where it's just overprotection of everything, instead of just thinking about self-reliance and what do you need? Hey, it's a wild world. There are predators out there. We need to act as if we still live in a place that's kind of uncivilized, because as long as you can walk out the door and not everybody knows the difference between right and wrong and what a right is, and the fact that you define a right and it's negative, you have the right to do anything that does not take away from somebody else's individual rights. And if we all played in that game, we wouldn't need 40,000 new laws being introduced and all this other stuff and elected representatives. But we don't want to teach people actual fact from fiction, right and wrong, these simple things that are part of natural law. And we want to make everything complicated, because everything that we've been growing up with and living in as far as American culture is part of a very sophisticated control system that employs a lot of people who think that money is some sort of metric of wealth, when really money is a counterfeit. It hides the true power, which is reason, and the true value, which is understanding, and the true currency, which is knowledge. And so as long as we don't see that wisdom is wealth, and passing on wisdom to our future generations is a form of wealth domestication. It's taking power, which is reason, and spreading it to other people. It's in an infinite supply, and it's not based on scarcity. And we can improve all of our situations by learning to think this way and stop taking the bait and following the bait trail into the traps.
And I want to let everybody know that you have said that the powers that be need to dehumanize people around the world in order to get the American people to support what otherwise would be considered or recognized as atrocities. That's not what you said verbatim, but that's the gist of something you said that stuck with me. And I was watching CNN the other day when I was at the club on the treadmill, Richard, and I always like to keep an eye on what the enemy is up to, so that's about the only time I ever watched CNN. And they were reporting that the Pentagon has just released a new 36-page manifesto from what they call the 9/11 mastermind, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who, as you probably know, was waterboarded 183 times before he would admit to any involvement in 9/11. And the next thing you know, he confessed to being the 9/11 mastermind. I thought it was shocking to see CNN roll out pictures of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed as the 9/11 mastermind in this story, because what they did in this piece, and I'll show it on screen here in this video, Richard, is they were showing him with a very, very long beard and a turban, and he looked just like Osama bin Laden. It's just shocking levels of propaganda that are shoved down the throats of the people 24/7.
Well, I think for all too long, it's not that people accept it. They just don't have an outlet to reflect back. I mean, when they were getting the newspapers back in the day, there's not really, you can write a letter to the editor and maybe it gets printed and maybe it doesn't. And today in the internet culture, sure, you can make some comments online to the story and, this and that, but basically they have momentum and they are just carrying their lies forward. It's the same thing with Kennedy. If you actually sat down as an investigator and went through the evidence that exists, especially the Warren Commission report, the 26 volumes, there's 15 in testimony and 11 in exhibits. If you actually go through there is no way you would come up with a story that we all grew up believing, or not believing, but being told. Because I don't think I've ever believed that from the time I was a child. It doesn't make sense. I just finished composing a 12-hour is it 12 hours? I think it's 18 hours actually, now that I added some other pieces. On a JFK 50th episode. Now, it's not meant to be listened to all at once. It's more of an archive to be preserved into the future of relevant evidence that does exist, that has primary sources and interviews with people who were there at the scene. And it goes into a lot of details that I haven't seen covered in any other, the majorly circulated JFK studies. So I wanted to put something on the record. Now, in order to do that, I had to listen to hundreds of hours of content to come up with this 18 hours of what I feel to be pretty juicy content. Because if you listen, it's something that if you made a bet with somebody over dinner and said, hey, well, I bet, just listen to this one episode of this one podcast and come back and tell me what you think. That person would find themselves getting a pen and pencil and a notebook, and they'd be looking stuff up on Google and taking notes and going through the references. You'd get a better education than any college in this country is going to give you on that topic or American history in totality, because it's not a disconnected event. It connects into Watergate, it connects into Vietnam, it connects into 9/11, connects into the Patriot Act, and it connects into the tyranny we're experiencing today, because the rise of the surveillance state was hand in hand, and the rise of the military-industrial complex, it's right hand in hand. And so the episodes that I did prior to the JFK episode also laid out the rise of the surveillance state and the rise of the whistleblowers, which is how we know about this growing surveillance state.
Is that going to be free on your site? Tell us how people get to listen to that on your site. What will that be called? And tell people about membership or anything else, because we want to support you.
Sure. It's tragedyandhope.com. Tragedy and Hope is named after a famous history book that really gives, it's like the Rosetta Stone to understand the verifiable scholastic level understanding of the New World Order, something that has become such a cliched term. But that term was created by the people who are the globalists. They're the collectivists. They're the people who have a mission to destroy America and to make it part of the British Empire. They've been doing it unchecked for the most part for more than 100 years. And I could drown you in the documents. Literally, I could put you in a room and drown you with documents that uphold this in their own words. It's not conspiratorial at all. It's just a historical study. So what I do at Tragedy and Hope is we produce media in the form of videos, the history series, History So It Doesn't Repeat, and a podcast called The Peace Revolution. The Peace Revolution is found under the audio tab at tragedyandhope.com, and you can dip into any episode you want. They're all kind of self-contained components, but they also fit together. By going through the various components in the curriculum, you're now building out a solid understanding of the education system or Agenda 21, or, here's all the facts just on the term New World Order. I think that there was one of the episodes where we came up with, 100 references for it in history. So you can, follow the chain of events through. We've done episodes on productivity methodologies like getting things done. So you can learn how to find time in your schedule to do research when you find, there's a cornucopia of information that you've not been exposed to your whole life. Now you've got to find a way to start consuming it. Our job on my end is to produce commercial-free media and to provide it to the public. The people who listen and appreciate that then donate and subscribe to our website to gain access to the community. That supports us and allows us to keep creating media. They also get access to being able to discuss, study, post videos, post blogs, and there's a good number of people from around the world. I think last year, 178 countries had people that downloaded our content. So we don't have as, deep an audience as Alex Jones. There's not millions of people tuning in, but we do have a really broad message that applies to basically anyone who can decipher English.
Well, Richard, thanks for that. And everybody, just be sure to get over to tragedyandhope.com. On that podcast note, I listened to a podcast that you did with two other very, very smart fellas, and I don't have their names in front of me, but you guys were talking about the history of the intelligence agencies, the roots of the MI6, the CIA, the bankster relationships, and it was, again, one of the most compelling podcasts I've ever listened to. I had it on my MP3 player. I listened to that broadcast at least 3 times, maybe 4, and I swear to you, Richard, every time I listened to it, I learned something new. Do you have any recollection of who those two folks were or what the name of that podcast would have been?
I would think that was a History So It Doesn't Repeat episode. It was likely titled The History of the United States Intelligence Community and Why It Spies on Americans, or everyone, now that we know. They spy on everyone. It was Jan Irvin and Kevin Cole, and if you watch the video of that, it's fantastic because I use this modeling tool for information called the brain, where I can take all the information that Kevin and Jan are talking about and show you in a contextual reference how it fits in with other people in the puzzle. And so it's a really fascinating piece of software that I use in a lot of my presentations, that I sell the model on our website. So if you want to get started using the same model that I'm using in the videos, or you can start from scratch, the software is a free download. But really, if you watch that episode, you'll be able to watch that episode 10 or 20 times and still learn every time, because especially if you're taking notes and starting to add information into your own brain model, it's really going to catalyze your learning potential and your interest and your comprehension and your ability to repeat the information. I credit a lot of my ability to recall information from putting it in the model and connecting it, because you're actually building synapses in your brain while you're doing that. So it's exercise for your mind.
Well, I'll check it out because, again, I've listened to it. I haven't watched it, and I'm sure I'd learn even more watching it. It's phenomenal information and research, and it helps dot I's and cross T's over history, over a time span of decades, and it was just...
the other thing that I should mention about the videos is, you'll watch the video and you'll see the pages clicking through in the brain model, bringing up the different information. What's important to know is on tragedyandhope.com, in the top menu bar, it says the brain. And you can download the model, you can look at the model, you can click through it and stop the video and actually, catalyze your learning experience. So, in that 2-hour interview that I conducted, you might be able to listen to that for a week, going through that, pausing it every couple minutes and picking up what you don't know, because then you'll have the same level of understanding as the people who are actually doing the interview. And then what's the difference? You can actually go out and start teaching people about this too, because it is a brilliant tapestry of American history that is totally verifiable. And I'm surrounded by at least 1,000 books here in this house that demonstrate this in the first person, in their own words. And it's just a matter of reading. And I think that reading makes a country great. And if you go back to 9/11 and look at Bush sitting there for 8 minutes while he should have been whisked away by the Secret Service, right behind his head, there's a little prop. And it says, "Reading makes a country great." So if anything, 9/11 has catalyzed my interest in learning and reading and communicating with my friends and family. And I don't want to say that I've drawn benefits from that event. There's some people in the world who have really drawn benefits and gotten promotions and stuff. It's a horrific event. But if there's anything that those people want us to do coming out of it, it's not get more military contracts and invade these countries and do all this crazy stuff in America's name. It would be to get back to the roots of what America should be right now, which is a land of freedom and opportunity built on integrity and reason and rationality and facts, and think that we are all leaning in that direction. And at some point, there's going to be a tipping point.
Let's talk about the NSA. When we talk about the history of surveillance, the NSA is maybe a new term in the past few years to some people. We had all heard of the CIA, and that's not as many people perhaps were familiar with the NSA. And noteworthy is the fact that Keith Alexander, the head of the NSA, did a YouTube video, a video that was released by the Department of Defense on YouTube in late 2013, and it was the most disliked, by a total thumbs down, the most disliked video of any video released in 2013. Where do you stand on Edward Snowden, what the NSA is doing, and the fact that the NSA is trying to spin this all in the name of national security?
Well, the NSA, I mean, they're going to do what they do. It's up to people just not putting up with it, not believing it, not being quiet about it. I mean, when you hear it on TV and you're in a public place, you know, say something about it. Don't let people just take that as, oh, well, no one's contesting it, so it must be true. As far as Snowden, the best interview that I've heard, listen to any of John Rappaport's interviews, either with Henrik on Red Ice or any number of other outlets. I did one with him, but I didn't talk about Snowden with him. He has a really good perspective on Snowden because there's a lot that is not presented through the public story, through the public broadcasting of that, through the mainstream media. And the fact that he got so much coverage is very questionable, not just from a whistleblower like myself, but other whistleblowers like Thomas Drake and Bill Binney and other whistleblowers who I think it was Peace Revolution episode 77 or 78, where I did the rise of the whistleblowers and detailed numerous whistleblowers coming out since the 1970s telling us about the NSA, and then all of a sudden Snowden gets, you know, he doesn't want to live in a country like Russia, but then he moves off to Russia. So, you know, there's just a lot of questions when you get into who he is and who he's worked for, and I'm not taking the same. I've never heard anyone in the mainstream media question it in this angle because the questions that they throw are always red herrings. But the fact that there's a lot of conveniences there, because the NSA's perspective is they just told you all this stuff and nobody's behavior changed. Nobody really changed their habits, and they know they got most of America in the news. Not your audience, not my audience, but a lot of other people who spend a lot of time watching Bill O'Reilly and, you know, those other Glenn Beck and those guys. Those audiences are in trouble. Those audiences are in trouble. And you know what? Those audiences include our families, because I know people in my family who watch those channels and don't tune into our work. So it's just about learning to build these bridges of communication. And you have to start with empathy. What makes us friends and family? What makes us all human beings? We all have these innate connections that the media wants to divide and conquer us by. They want us to think that everything's racist. No, it's not racist. It has nothing to do with race. We're all human beings. We all need water. We all get dehydrated. We all need food. We all need shelter. We all need some amount of security in our lives, you know, in order to live in any type of society. And that's why we live around other people, because it's a lot easier to get things done when we have other people. But when you get into elected representatives, when you get into presidents or kings or any of that sort of stuff, then everything goes haywire. And I think as long as we keep it on a local level and start, you know, building the connections around us, then we can just saturate every place with a local level and get rid of these illusions of, you know, government and authority, and that people have a divine right to be a king and colonize other places, and that some people are slaves in this state, but you're not a slave over here. And over here you own your body and you can do whatever you want, but over here you go to jail for it. And over here you can own this firearm, but over here you go to jail for it. And it's just a lot of ludicrous nonsense that comes from us all. Most people philosophize from midstream. They've found themselves at a certain point in life and they're like, this philosophy clicks, but does it connect back to reality? And are there contradictions between reality and where you think things are? Because I hear people espousing or parroting ideas all the time that they hear on the media, but they don't really understand those ideas. And this happened for far back as Rome. It's called Psittacism, after the Latin word sitta, P-S-I-T-T-A, which means to parrot.
I have friends and family, too, who just, they don't want to listen to anything that I have to say about anything. They want to stay ingrained and invested in their own current paradigm, regardless of what reality presents to them on a daily basis, regardless of what the NSA is doing, regardless of the trampling of the Bill of Rights and Constitution. They want to hold fiercely to their right-left paradigm and just believe that all will be okay if they can get a Republican back in the office, etc. It's terrible.
Well, and you know what? And it's common too. So the kind way that I've found to refer to that is the terrarium mentality. A terrarium is an artificial habitat you provide for a pet. And people who love the terrarium and don't want to go outside and actually figure, oh, wait, I'm outside of being provided for every day in this artificial place. So what you find is people don't have a metric for knowledge. They have no metaphysics. They have a lot of epistemology. They have a lot of thoughts about stuff, but those thoughts don't actually come from the observation of the things that exist, right? So the idea is formatting a hard drive. Once you format your hard drive with a philosophy that represents objective truth, then you can find facts and fiction, you can determine right and wrong with consistency, and you can pass that on. What most people are in is a default disk state, yet to be formatted, which is chaos. And so chaos and no objective truth, these are synonyms. And so the philosophical term for that is solipsism, where they argue that there is no such thing as objective truth, that truth is whatever you make it up to be and whatever you believe in your mind. That's fine for a person, but you know what? As an individual, you can't even survive in nature by yourself like that, let alone coexist with other people. So the point is that solipsism, this poisonous absence of philosophy that has engripped our society, is only possible in the terrarium. It cannot exist outside the terrarium, and thus I think it's a function of civilizations forming and government. So as long as there has been governments and cultures and societies that are living in an urban area, there has been, you can get people to believe that there is no such thing as objective truth, and you can trick them and, magic tricks and psychological warfare. But that doesn't work so well on, let's say, hill folk who have to go out and provide for themselves every day because they know there is such a thing as cold. And if it gets too cold, you're going to get frostbite and exposure and you're going to die. And there is such a thing as water that is not potable, not drinkable. Right. And so if you just think, well, I'm going to wave a magic crystal over this and the water's going to be fine, you're going to find out real quick that doesn't exist. However, in the urban confines where you don't know where your water comes from, your food comes from, and you have no idea how to build a shelter for yourself or make fire, keep yourself warm. When you don't have these self-reliance concepts in your mind's very weak and malleable and easily entertained and easily tricked. And this is what, I see this as something that they found out, they discovered, and now they've systematized. Now the terrarium mentality is 95% of America. They've declared war on natural law and individual liberty in this country, and yet nobody's really, entire communities are ignorant of this. And so if it weren't for people like Alex Jones doing what he does for the past 20 years, that inspired a lot of other people to say, hey, yeah, you know what? This dude needs help, and I don't want to sit around waiting for him to do everything. There's a lot of us out there that have been trying to consistently, what are the useful components here to get ourselves free of this situation, and how do we pass out the components to more people? This is the 21st century American Revolution. It's not a physical war. It's a war of your mind. That's why we did State of Mind Psychology of Control, because we're telling you, here's a map to the battlefield. It's not the battlefield itself. It is a map. It is an extraction. It's a representation of that. Take it and learn from it and improve upon it and, find out what areas you might be being adversely affected by. Because once you learn about it, you can do something about it. And until you learn about it, you can't do anything about it. So I think that's really why we spend a lot of time, all of us, creating media and trying to get it out to our respective audiences, because without this consistent flow of here's what exists that you're not being presented with, and it's an important component. You might not need it right now, but this is an important component to understand the nature and answer all your own questions of who's doing this, why are they doing this, and how's it going on? There are answers to those questions, and I see everyone trying to recreate the wheel. Instead, I'm like, here's plans for wheels. Go and create.
That's brilliant. Well, let's talk about the terrarium before we let you go. Let's talk about this construct that allows our friends and neighbors, the sheeple people, to remain in that construct. If they can only survive there and believe what they believe in that construct, in the terrarium, is our best hope that the terrarium finally collapses, that being this fiat debt-based, war-based monetary system. The Pentagon can't survive without its $600 billion in fiat a year. How do we get out of this mess, and what do you see as our greatest hope for the future?
Well, I think the mentality is what supports all that stuff. So let's say that the state we're all in is a cocoon. And that by changing our mentality is how we get out of that cocoon, going from a static stimulus response type of mechanism to putting thinking back in between stimulus and response. Stimulus response is control, it is slavery, it is everything that the founding fathers fought against. And stimulus thinking response, well, that's liberty. That's a free, autonomous, self-reliant human being with the world at his fingertips, and the world is his resource or her resource, right? So these are the basic justifications and like the defining territory of like, here's why that's bad and here's why this is good. The whole mentality of the terrarium has to be melted away day by day by people exposing themselves to healthy media, by changing your habits. Stop taking in poisonous corporate media with pharmaceutical commercials and all that stuff. You do not need that. You need to do something with your time. You need to change your habits. And we produce great products that we give out to people for free. I mean, there's hundreds of hours of productions that we've done that touch all these different areas of research that people have been looking into for the past 10 years on the internet. That's the trend since 9/11, the truther community. Here's how to actually find truth, and here's the truth that exists out there. And once you know those two things, now you can go discover new truth that no one's observed yet, but other people can verify. This is how we progress understanding through discussion and not argumentation or debate. It's about discovery. And so each of us is out there, and part of this history, we don't have to sit here and let this all happen to the world. We can provide resistance. And the more people who provide mental resistance and intellectual self-defense and then can demonstrate physical reliance and physical self-defense, that's it. Non-aggression and self-defense. And if we know right from wrong and we can spread that information to other people, I think we're all the better for it, because the people who recognized the tyranny in 1775 and 1776 that led up to the revolution, these people knew right from wrong. They knew how to light a fire, and they knew the value of firewood and nails. Like when they would move, they'd burn the house and save the nails because there was a shortage. The British had an embargo, right? So people were making their own nails back then. So we just have to think. There's an ammunition shortage today. They're taking away our ability to even have target practice. Well, how qualified are you to go handle a firearm when you're not able to practice in this country? That's them bleeding us. We're being bled. There are leeches. I'm not saying it's a wolf at the door. Yeah, you could say there's a wolf at the door. But the wolves of Wall Street are the ones we should be looking at. It's not people coming in. It's not the redcoats like that. These are the guys with the waistcoats. We should be watching for the waistcoats.
That's right. Yeah, it's not Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. It's the banksters and those that control the Federal Reserve. It's the people at the very tip top of the pyramid that have created this construct. Last question. Do you see us getting near a tipping point? And when I say that, I often cite bovine growth hormone in the milk, Monsanto's BGH. When enough people decided to figure out what it was, and they decided they didn't want it in their diets anymore, nobody bought the stuff, and it soon exited the milk supply almost overnight. Do you see us nearing a tipping point for liberty? Because I see lots of examples of it. CNN's viewership is at really a multi-year, if not all-time low. The inception of the creation of the Tea Party. Are you seeing us nearing a tipping point that's meaningful in any way?
I think I see tipping points every day, and then these are small tipping points, of course, but they're all happening all over the place. And at a certain time, those tipping points all start to add up across the nation. And people start to change their mentality little bit by little bit by little bit, day by day. I mean, that's the whole thing, to continue to learn each day. And I just think it's a growing trend right now to wake up and start learning than it is for people to go into a coma and fall asleep. I think even the youth are being inundated to the point where they're aware of it. They're aware they're being tracked, and they might not care about it yet. They might think they have nothing to hide, but they do. You have privacy for a reason. And if you don't think you do, then turn over your bank account and your PIN numbers to the next guy you see on the street and see what happens. Okay? So you might not think you have anything to hide, but you do have a need for privacy. And this whole, I don't have anything to hide, so it's okay that they spy on everybody. No, it's not okay when other people lose their rights, because you're one of those people. It's going to happen to you eventually. And that's a sign of an irrational mind with a short-term mindset that's not about surviving in this world, which does have predators. And it's about someone who's ingrained into the terrarium lifestyle and goes outside on a cold day not dressed for it. And his car breaks down and he's got to wait for help because he doesn't know how to fix it. It's these types of things. And it's like, those things add up to you not being in control of your life. They add up to other people being in control. And if your rights were not so valuable, like you might not realize they're valuable, but the people that run this planet do. They find you very valuable as a human resource, and that's why they go through so much trouble, spend so much money to inundate us through the education system and the media and the movies and everything else that they've got out there. The natural state of this planet is for individuals to live in freedom and peace and harmony. And it has to be artificially created all the time. All the wars have to be artificially created. They are not natural. At least in not 150 years, past. There's evidence all through that it's just people who are systematically using other people and other people's children to gain them wealth and bounty out of other people's blood. And it's a system that has gone on unchecked because people tolerate having a king or queen and think that, oh, it's all good. They're born special and they got all this stuff. I'm not arguing for socialism or communism or any type of ism. I argue for autonomy, and I argue using reason. And on that ground, there's not a person out there who can rationally argue for slavery. There's not.
You're right. You've left me speechless. But I was going to say, in addition to those tipping point signs, is the fact that the people in the terrarium, even those who aren't fully awake, know that things are messed up enough that they, pretty much collectively in this country stood up against the drums of war beating for more war, this time in Syria. And that to me was extremely buoying because it's the first time in my lifetime I've seen the American people collectively stand up and say, hell no, we're done with these illegal wars of conquest.
Well, the wars, at least in the past 100 years, looking at World War I, World War II, Vietnam, and the past war, whatever you want to call it, for the past 13 years, these wars were designed by the people who profit from the wars. You can go back to Smedley Butler's War is a Racket, 1934, where he blew the whistle on the business plot, which was a plot to overthrow FDR. And you can, he cited Standard Oil and all these big oil and, whatever. And
plus Bush was involved in that, yep.
Yeah, so, and then you can come up to today. I mean, it's still the military contractors and the people who make all those parts for the bombs and the planes and the helicopter, all that stuff. Those places got to keep showing a profit. They got stockholders. They got Wall Street, blah, blah, blah. So it's an excuse to frame up some people on the other side of the world that has some oil. And again, this is not an American policy. It's not an American agenda to go around the world and have like 300 bases around the world. That, by the way, is a British agenda that infected our country as the banking system did in the 1800s. These are not things that this country is supposed to be doing, and we shouldn't be tolerating it in any way, shape, or form. And yet, look at the, like 2/3 of our tax dollars, if not more, go to that so-called defense budget, which is really a budget of aggression that has been used to sully and soil the reputation of America and all the hard work and integrity of all of our families over the past however many hundreds of years that people have lived here has been defecated on by British Anglo-American establishment activities that have usurped the natural ruling power of this country and have broken any tether between the people and the people that are here calling themselves our government.
No, you're
That's a historical perspective. That's not my opinion. I could flesh that all out in their own words.
No, I know you could. And, the words of the mother to the Rothschild sons, I think the 5 boys said, if my sons did not want wars, there would be none. And that's probably a good way to summarize and end our conversation. We've been speaking with Richard Grove, who can match me wit to wit times 2. Richard, I was nervous coming into the interview because I wish I had been more prepared. I really hold you in extremely high esteem, and I want to thank you so much for your time.
Sean, I want to thank you for doing what you do, for diligently and consistently purifying this information and filtering it and getting it out to the public and providing people with some healthy information, because the creek people are drinking from is polluted in the mainstream media. So it does take a lot of effort. I know the type of effort it takes to put together a show and to get it out on a consistent basis. And so I want to commend you and say there's no need to be nervous, dude. We're just all out here trying to bushwhack our way to freedom. And it takes a lot of falling down and getting up. And that's the whole thing, is like once you're willing to fall down and get up, it's like there's nothing you can't do. And so when you mix things like freedom and liberty and hard work and family, I think we all have the support we need to go forward and continue growing healthy and to regain the immune system of this country.
You couldn't have said it better, and I really do try to support the work of others. Anybody that wants to write an article that's well written and researched always has a place to post it if it comes from a place of truth, truthful news. can post it on my site. And I always like to say we're all in this mess together. We're all learning. Some of us know more than others. Some of us know less, but ultimately we're all in this mess together. And any of us that have woken up certainly deserve to hold the hand and help others along who are in the process of waking up. And Richard, you're definitely one of those people. You've inspired me. And again, I just really thank you for your time. I invite everybody to check out tragedyandhope.com. Support Richard. Is there a membership that the people can take part in?
Sure. I mean, the most important thing to know is that the history series that we do and the Peace Revolution, those are available to everyone for free. So, have at it. Share with your family and friends. For people who want to get into the community, there's a basic access, which I think is, $5 a month. And there's an advanced access, which I think is like $15 a month. The advanced access is what really helps us out because, it's expensive trying to do any of this sort of stuff and compete with a corporate production value. But I think we churn out some pretty good media for the little drops of input that we get as far as financing from individuals. And we don't have any advertisers or sponsors or anything like that. So everything we do is funded by an individual person just like you. And that's how we're able to grow and continue sharing a wider and more comprehensive palette with the ever-growing audience.
Well, Richard, again, thank you so very, very much. And you guys, I want to thank each and every one of you for listening and sharing this information with others. Thank you for supporting Richard and checking out tragedyandhope.com, and share that link with your family and friends, because I'll tell you what, there's more material there than a person can digest in a year. So get over there, check it out, learn, and know thyself, because that's the only way we're going to take this thing back, is for us to each take our own personal autonomy back, stand up to these robber barons, and take back our Constitution, Bill of Rights, and our nation. Richard Grove, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sean.